Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with the Center for Deep Political Research. It's a pleasure to be able to chat with you guys individually, and now we got you all on the same panel to be able to discuss. Well, why don't we start with what do we call deep political research? What is this idea? Is it different from deep state? Is it something that is it its own, or is it maybe the language that gets people confused?
I can speak to that. Deep politics, Peter Dale Scott began using the term deep politics in some of his earliest work on the JFK assassination. Deep events, deep politics, things that are kept secret from the public, that are done secretly and kept secretly, conspiracies, covert operations. But it hit me one day that what we're talking about here is Machiavellianism. And he wrote a small book. He wrote two books, actually. He wrote this big multi-volume thing. This is like a condensed version called The Discourses. Niccolo Machiavelli, Italian scholar and military guy. And what we all learned in high school was The Prince. But this is a very condensed outtakes from The Discourses, which is a huge thing about the modern state. This is still taught in political science today as the origin of the modern state. The Prince, though, represents, and this goes back to like 1527 when he was doing this stuff. He lived 1469 to 1527. And that's how far back the concepts of the modern state go, the city-state, the nation-state. And all of the dark, deep, bad stuff that rulers had to do on occasion to stay in power. He wrote about that too, and he condensed that all into The Prince. And for some reason, I guess you got to wait till you become a political science major before you learn about the discourses. But this defines all of it that we're dealing with. Everything, that Peter Dale Scott calls the deep state and deep politics. It's all Machiavellianism, so there's nothing new about it. Alan Dulles, The Craft of Intelligence. This is the book he was writing supposedly in 63. His excuse for traveling around the country and appearing at strange places like Dallas, supposedly in the process of writing this book. And it came out in 64. It was sort of his reward to himself and his public coming out to people in the know. This was his clue that, look what I did in 63. Alan Dulles, the new Prince.
If I brought it to this question, how much of the things that we can say that would be what the idea of the general public would say is conspiracy, the crazy stuff, the insane stuff? Or if we talk about the idea of what is actual conspiracy, what is actual real horrors that are going on, this idea of what a deep state is. I mean, if we talk about the idea like Freemasonry, for instance, there's two sides of that thing. There's regular Freemasonry, then there's the kooky, fun, wizardry, magic type, insane craft stuff. And I go, it's the best method out there if you start thinking about the idea of what's for show and then what actually works behind the scenes. You could take that example with like Bohemian Grove. You could take that example with things of that sort. How much of that is real or how much of that is just people having fun in the woods and doing whatever? You get into this aspect. It's scary if it's whoever doing that type of stuff, but the aspect of the real, what I would call, and I've called the Illuminati, I've been laughed at by like skeptics, Michael Shermer, all these types of things, until I explain what my definition of the Illuminati is. And it's not people in black cloaks that, sit at a table and, talk about how they're going to rule the world and flip a lever switch and a volcano goes off. What it really is an aspect of that. It's a structuralized system. It's what people call the simulation. When they say that they're living in a simulation, you realize you are in a system that is set in place. And the system that is set in place is a business template that does not mash well with personal. It's very, very hard. Artists, for instance, musicians, any of these people that aren't like exceptionary or these minority few that somehow rise to stardom, it's very, very difficult to be creative on these aspects of things. Creativity is not hard for an individual, but when you live in a society that doesn't necessarily, as a disguise, I would say, of this idea of creativity, of this idea of you can do your own business startup. It's not true though, because once you start diving into it, there is a long, hard road of being in it for 5, 6, 7, 8 years that breaks you down to a point where you end up giving up. And then you fall into a system thinking that it wasn't for you. Necessarily, is that their fault? Or is it a fault to a bigger system? And that's what I would call an Illuminati type thing. Literally a machine that just breeds the same 9 to 5 people over and over and over again. And we know we live in a world that doesn't, everyone is not a 9 to 5.
Yeah, big question. I was going to say that there's to sort of combine what Richard started off with and what you just said. I think that you are correct to look at these things as a public and private view. So, for example, if you're talking about the Illuminati and you mean that they are doing sorcery or something along those lines, uh, probably not. But if you mean people who are involved in the military industrial complex and that sort of thing, then yes. Although I didn't think we were going to start off this way, but I have discovered, and I think other researchers end up running into this, to this thing that I call the weirdness. Uh, Ed Curtin and I have talked about this before too. I don't know if you know Ed Curtin, but he'd be great to have on your show too. Which is that you can't make 100% sense of everything just sticking to the facts. There are things that you run into repeatedly that are very strange, and that some people talk about it openly, some people don't. I tend not to write about these things, but other people have written about them, and some of them are scholars. There's a book called Fire in the Minds of Men, who was written by the guy who was the Librarian of Congress under Bill Clinton. I can't remember his name right now. Billingsworth, something like that. And he's talking about the Illuminati as an entity, having inspired both the French and the American revolutions. And you can go a long way towards showing that there are secret societies that were involved in that. Now, what relevance does that have to us? I mean, who knows? But there's other information out there. For example, there's a book called The Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital, very interesting book about the layout of Washington, D.C., which was again done by a Frenchman, where there are sections of D.C. that it's laid out very specifically. And it has something to do with sun worship. And there are owls built into the structure. Like, there's weird stuff. I don't usually talk about it that much because I don't think it has a lot to do necessarily with what's going on right now. But it's out there if you want to find it. And another duality that we're talking about, Richard brings up the discourses, which I think everybody should read, but specifically the Prince, as it's taught. I've heard many professors say that it's satire, that he meant it as satire, and that takes the edge off of it, even though it seems like a perfectly sane analysis of political governments. It's taught often as a covert joke.
Is that the book that Alan Dulles wrote?
No, I'm
No,
talking about not kidding. I'm talking about the Prince.
Because when you mentioned Alan Dulles' book, I start going, imagine if you just had a bunch of these people that are writing bits and pieces to what the big plan is. And in a sense, like the big plan is just like a way to be like, if you follow this rule book, a lot of good things are going to happen for you. I mean, we know, like, actually just want to bring this up because in Jeff's episode, we talked about Scientology a little bit. But I mean, you look at Scientology, you're in until you're not. And then when you're not, you're cast out by every single person, anybody that associates with you, that you're blacklisted in a sense. So if you look at like what rules they got to follow, take the same rules for what works for the military industrial complex, the things that like, you fail and you go upwards or something like that. You take the blame for something, you show that you're loyal in a sense that you'll do whatever. And then you have a bunch of people that are maybe not the most creative in aspects of writing their own book or writing all this that isn't a biography about themselves. And then you have someone like Alan Dulles that writes like, I'm not going to give away the whole plan, but I'll give a piece of it. And here's this type of situation, because they're, like I said, not that creative. And then you can take like a Da Vinci Code of how many books have been written on this idea of this type of thing. And you start going, it's all laid out in one giant formation.
I think I can simplify this. Others can chime in on this. It finally hit me several years ago, and I wrote about in some of my essays in my book about large conspiracies that we know about. Conspirations, D-Day, 50 men worldwide knew the exact date and location of the invasion of France by the Allies. 50. So there's a starting point for a large conspiracy. And they accomplished it. It was completely secret and unknown to Germany. But then it hit me, there's a bigger one that we all know about, but we never think about it and this one is a conspiracy, massive. The Holocaust. It was planned secretly at a conference. It had an enormous bureaucracy, and the average person had a sense. They would witness the groups being gathered up and leaving on trains. Some of them witnessed the internment camps, and word of mouth spread. There are good books about how, in recent years, about how the general populace of Germany, that we now call the good Germans, they pretty much they try to be in denial. It's like with the Kennedy assassination today. You're in fear and denial at the same time. It's avoidance. There's usually not complete denial. There are the people who pretend to defend the conclusion of the Warren Commission. Not the Warren Commission, by the way, because the Warren Commission, 6 of the 7 eventually reversed themselves. They knew it was nonsense. They knew that they were lying to the public. Before they died, they reversed themselves. Alan Dulles died in 1969, and he wasn't about to reverse himself because he's the one who did the whole thing. But the Holocaust is a perfect example of a massive government conspiracy that killed millions of people, and people generally had a sense that it was going on at the time. And the U.S., a lot of recent books on the Holocaust talk about how it was not reported. There's a book about how the Times actually lied to keep it out of the public mind of Americans. It wasn't until maybe like the arrest of Eichmann by the Israelis that it became in the early 60s, it was starting to become a well-known thing. Certainly it was not as well known today between, say, 44 and 64. It was not as well known as today. So there you go. There's a perfect example of a massive secret government conspiracy.
I just want to ask the question. You guys can correct me and say whatever if I'm wrong, but is that just because it wasn't seen as like something that they needed to get involved in? It seems like the only time, like, the idea of protecting freedom or the idea of doing whatever, it's only if it's like there's a financial gain to it, or there's something that is going to be a threat to you or a threat to the establishment. You're not really going to get involved if it would just stay like kind of Poland in a way, where you're trying to be like remain neutral in an aspect.
Well, that's sort of that's actually a very complicated question. Part of it certainly has to do with the fact that Jewish people are the other and were so back then. So trying to get Americans particularly interested in what was a quote Jewish problem was difficult, and Roosevelt was aware of that. In fact, there was also a lot of very open. There were people that were involved in the KKK back then. I was going to say it's more open than it is now, but actually it's getting to the same point, including people who were very powerful, like Irénée Dupont, for example, was a fascist sympathizer. General Motors, Ford. They were on the side of the fascists essentially, and so it was not an easy sell, the Holocaust. And also we're going to get flagged by everybody, but the Vatican, Catholic Church was also very important in covering up those crimes all the way through, because again, I almost don't want to get into this because it's a very complicated question, but and we can easily spend hours just talking about this. But the time at that time, capitalism, and American capitalism in particular, was aligned with the fascists in many ways. And actually they still are today, largely because after World War II, we took those fascists in and made them and put them in our government. So I don't know if anybody, I feel like I'm talking a lot.
No, that's another conspiracy that fits completely in line with this Operation Paperclip you just mentioned, bringing Nazis over to help us in our new fight against the communist threat. And not many people knew about that in our government. The actual machinations of that were probably small, yet we brought in thousands and thousands of Nazis to be part of our government, to be part of every institution within the United States. And one of the things that we're kind of dancing around a little bit is that institutions don't exist without built-in safety guards without self-preservation mechanisms. And so that's one reason the secrecy is kept, is because to talk about what is a quote unquote conspiracy, you easily marginalize yourself, and academia is a huge part of that.
Well, when you get down to the aspect of where I start drawing giant areas of concern, is the fact that when we do say whatever these conspiratorial topics are, these controversial topics are, there's no open dialogue that gets brought out between them. There's no discourse that is done there. They get labeled as conspiracy. Either people won't entertain it, or it gets so polarized that people start fighting. And that's the best way to cover up the tracks of your dirty laundry, I would say. And I think that's what we see all the time, is like this idea, like people say, like, I think we mentioned in the last panel, energy weapons, these aspects of things, of mass hysteria and all these types of things. I mean, as a general population, we're probably being fucked with more on a daily basis than we realize. And I think it's important to recognize things that are things that you should question, things that you would raise a flag at or say something about. And necessarily people don't know what those warning signs are. People don't know when something is the question. And I'm just going to toss this one out here because it's the best, most recent example I can give. You talk about the Epstein scenario. Then I see an article trending about Ghislaine Maxwell saying she's on suicide watch. And I go, they're literally telling you now what is going to happen next. I mean, is it so far out of the realm to think that you are not going to see an article about it? And you say that and people go, no, that's insane. That's crazy conspiracy. I go, this is the thing. When we reduce to arguing, when we reduce to calling each other names, when we reduce to shutting down an argument or just not even talking about it in general, you let them win. That's the whole point of things, is that when you lose that, whatever you want to call critical thinking, whatever you want to call asking a question, it's hard to define, I guess, necessarily what that is. I don't necessarily jump the gun on anything, but I definitely want to talk about stuff. I want to get everybody's perspective on it. I think discussing an issue only enhances the issue. It helps understand it more as well, too. But if you look at the general public, whether it's social media might put it in a weird form as well, too. Characters, you can't really hear someone's vocal language and be able to just depict what that question or whatever they're typing is being asked. But I mean, it's the best machine to literally get no fucking progress done. I mean, everyone is like, it's like 2 steps forward, 4 steps back, 2 steps forward, 4 steps back on everything.
You know, it's interesting that you say that, because it's makes me think of something that happened to me not too long ago. I give these, because of the film I made, I get asked to give talks at local library branches. So I gave a talk, just a JFK 101, what we know and why it matters talk, at the South Regional Library branch right here in Durham, North Carolina. A couple hundred people showed up. At the end of my talk, excuse me, at the end of my talk, there were 2 men sitting there wearing black coats, black jackets, black pants, black ties, men in black, right? They got up and came, gave me their card. They were from the Office of General Counsel from the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, College Park Archives 2, and just introduced themselves to me and said, "We enjoyed your talk." And of course, the first thing I said was, "Well, can you stick around for a beer? I'd love to bend your ear a little bit." And they said, "No, we have to get back to DC." And so they got in their car and drove back. Now, when I share this story with friends of mine and colleagues in academia, they call me a conspiracy nut. So, and my question to them is, I'm trying to figure out why they drove down and introduce themselves to me, why they would go to the motor pool, check out a car. Someone gave them orders to do that, to drive down from Washington, DC to Durham, North Carolina, sit through an hour-long talk at the South Regional Library branch right here in Durham, and then get back in their car, give me their card, and drive back to the Office of General Counsel for the National Archives. And when I asked that question, what does that mean? I have feelings about what that means to me, but to even ask that question, a colleague of mine at Duke University said, what are you saying? What are you saying, that this is a big conspiracy, that they're following you now? And I don't know, but to even ask that question with so much the weirdness that Joe just talked about, just landing right in my lap right here, to ask that question and be called a conspiracy nut is just a little ridiculous. And I keep that card in my wallet just as a reminder that clearly they were watching me give my JFK 101 talk. And so for me, it's not a far stretch to think that each one of us are being watched too, especially you, Robbie. Welcome to the team.
Thank God I don't live in a glass house.
Right. But it's that weirdness that Joe talked about, that it's hard for people to wrap their minds around, but it's real.
But just, can I say something here too, that in a democracy that we supposedly live in, or any semblance of that, it is so important to get to truth, to get to justice. And this automatic dismissal of conspiracy as defaulted to some, automatic paranoia, then we ultimately miss truths, or where men, as you know, Richard talked about the prince, and you know, people will lie, cheat, steal to kill, murder to gain and maintain power. That's ultimately what the prince said, that we we presume that these people will do the right thing. If we can't hold them to account, they won't. And missing these points in time, missing the JFK assassination or any other thing we're looking at, just automatically makes it easy to repeat those things. You know, just like there's discussion yesterday about the Secret Service maybe destroying documents associated with January 6th. Well, anybody, all of us here in this room know that's not a shock that what the Secret Service did in 1963, post 63, to eliminate documents, to remove them from the public so they wouldn't be seen. And yet, people seem surprised. These things can happen. They'll happen again if no one's held to account.
Well, the crazy thing is that people would give you the answer of, well, the media, they can't do it because the media would cover it. I'm like, you never thought of that the media is working with? Like, you would think that, you get one of your biggest hounds on a leash in a sense. And that is one of the things. If you got all this scrutiny, you get all this, they're covering every single thing. I mean, there's a reason why topics trend. The thing I talk about is we talk about all the trending topics today. What about the opioid crisis? I mean, 100,000 people died last year alone from the ages of 19 to 40, I think at 49. Like there wasn't even a mention of that. And you start realizing is where I talk about the Illuminati is not necessarily the system. The lines of the system are business. It's all these things that profit. They make money. They don't care about your feelings. There's none of that type of stuff. And through that, just understanding of my own, I can relate everything to the pandemic and everything right now, but I'm not going to, because that will get flagged off YouTube. And then we get into an area of when things get deemed as that's disinformation and that's misinformation. And then you see the things that get labeled disinformation and misinformation necessarily aren't any of those at all either. They might just be what they would call conspiracy, or what the modern language is conspiracy. It seems like everything's boiling down to now misinformation, disinformation, and conspiracy is kind of taking a back seat in a sense. I think it's the evolution of the language. But you're getting into this area of like, all right, so that means we have to make a disinformation board that's going to be able to curate what that is. I'm sorry, but if Google says we care about your best interest as a person, I don't fucking believe you. I'm sorry. I don't believe anybody has my best interest at heart. I think the only person that really is able to manage my best interest would probably be me. And maybe I throw like a family member in there. I think there's one probably that still cares about me at like a luncheon or barbecue every 4th of July. But I think that's an important thing to question is what happens when you put someone in position, let's take a position of fear. Immediately, people do not know how to react, and they look to what they would deem as an institution. Or they look at something that seems like they have expertise in this type of field that probably has more knowledge than the average person does. So people displace their fear. They give it to their government. That's necessarily not a good thing, and you probably shouldn't be doing that. It's not saying that the government is bad. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is you have a lot of people that are working in it that are bad actors, and that's what you need to look at. And I think that's a big thing that people need to question, because whenever we get into talks like this, they go, oh my God, it must be one of those shows that wants to tear up the government and they want anarchy and everything like that. I go, let me just ask you this. If you can't question that it's weird that when the same thing can happen in your own country, it's seen as a conspiracy, but when it happens overseas, you accept it at full face fucking value. I'm not nuts in saying that.
Yeah, in fact, that's one of the it's less good than it used to be, but it's one of the good ways to sort of keep track of what's happening in America is to read foreign newspapers. Le Monde for a long time was just the best. They finally did get bought by somebody, but in general, if you're reading other newspapers, other countries are less reluctant to publish about our missteps, just as we're fine with publishing that Vladimir Putin's conspiring to do one thing or another, right? We don't apply those same standards to ourselves, and that counts for everybody. And maybe that's the way to help people understand this. The one thing I would say about your Illuminati thing is that it's clearly not monolithic. Okay, it's not 8 guys in a room. What you do have is you have a lot of different actors, like you said, that are in competition with one another, who close ranks on certain issues. right, in order to keep business going. So it's not that a small group of people is defining everything that happens. It's just that there are certain things that are really good for business and certain things that aren't. And they're willing to compete within those areas. But if something threatens the entire system, then they'll close ranks and say, no, no, no. And that's what's going on in the media. So does the media tell the truth? They do occasionally, because there are reporters that work for them who don't know that they're not supposed to report on certain things. And so occasionally you will find really good articles about one thing or another. What doesn't happen, though, is when somebody writes a good article that the media then seizes upon it, and then you see it in daily coverage, right? It's a blip amongst all this chaff, whereas the media is interested in the chaff. So we get lots and lots of information about the Johnny Depp trial, right? It's like wall to wall, 24/7, right? What impact does the Johnny Depp trial have on any of our lives? Essentially none. Whereas the war that's going on has a lot more of an impact, right? And it would be a lot more interesting to report on that war very closely, and with people over there actually looking at what's happening, and we don't get any of that stuff.
I would just also throw in, I think it shows the power with the Johnny Depp trial. I think it shows the power of social construct and how powerful we are as a society to really influence change. I mean, we influence change with academia in the biggest sense. Peter Boghossian actually wrote a paper about this, and it actually got passed. There's a paper called The Misconceptual Penis Project. And what this paper was about, literally, there's quotes in it that talk about if you just spread your legs as a man, you're akin to raping the air around you. That's published in an academic paper that the institution passed and accepted because all they saw was certain marks of gender, certain marks of sexuality, certain marks of this, and they accepted it without fully reading into it. Now, not to crap on academia, I'm not doing that, but what I wanted to get to the point of, society impacts change in very, very drastic ways, and there's certain things that institutions will not go against because it fits society standards. We all know this with LGBTQ. How many companies really care about LGBTQ and how many people change their profile picture to have a rainbow flag? I think everyone saw that BS, but we notice that with our companies. We don't question our government, but then you see a CIA ad talking about how we're pro diversity, and they have literally like all these things where it's just like, why is the CIA talking? I think if you're in the CIA, we just pick people that are best for the job, not basis on what they fit on a checkbox or not. But it links again, bringing it back, going to ground myself in the society affects institutions, but it impacts change. And I think the reason with the Johnny Depp trial, while we got a lot of coverage on that, a lot of people were tweeting articles about like, if there was no evidence, this guy would be locked up, because the norm is usually that it is accurate about what happened. And then he found out it wasn't as accurate. So I would just throw that into the mix as well too.
To get back to what Joe was saying about elements of the deep state kind of going to war with one another. I recall incident a few years back when we had the party crashers that got into the White House, weren't on the guest list, and got within a stone's throw of President Obama. You look at something like that. So was that a message that was supposed to be sent to Obama? Perhaps, certainly looked like it, or was that a case of a message that was supposed to be sent to the Secret Service as well? Was that a case of different elements of the deep state going to war with each other? I mean, these are all things that you have to consider. I mean, obviously, it could have been just an innocent slip, but it's hard to look at something like that because these things do not happen every day. Not after Dallas, which also, to us, we know that wasn't an accident as well. But to a lay person, even they know that that's not the type of thing that's an accident. So, but the media looked at it, but they didn't ask the right questions. They looked at it like it was a big deal, but they didn't ask the questions that we ask. So, this is the kind of thing that we do.
Talked about the media a little bit. Joe was, I want to follow up with something Joe said about sometimes the media will touch on things, but do they really follow up? Or just back to that thing I was talking about the Secret Service. I saw an interview of Carol Leonnig, who writes for the Washington Post, and she wrote a book about the Secret Service and some of their, things they've done, the whole Cardiana or whatever thing, some of the stuff of their sordid past. And in the course of an interview last night, she actually specifically talked about how the Secret Service made boxes of things disappear, information they had about potential assassination attempts against JFK, they ignored. You know, I'm sure that has a lot to do with the name of the right wing guy. It slips my name that you guys will be familiar with. And I know that's what the story was. She had this information. She brought it out in this interview, and the person doing the interview that should have been something to say, wow, really? No, they just went on to something else. You know, really? I mean, the assassination of JFK and the Secret Service covered up potential plots against it. We don't want to talk about that? I guess not. Let's move on to something else, you know? So that's kind of, I think that dovetails the conversation here about how the media might touch on things, but it's still makes them in some cases a pariah of sorts if they venture into certain conspiracies.
Well, it goes back to what we're addressing about labeling something so bad. And when you label like the JFK topic, if you don't fit the official, like it was one person that killed the president, even if it's a documented things that, oh, look, we have evidence that there's this, that is for a lot of people in media, they're like, you're going to throw your career down the toilet. You're going to trash everything you got. And what I pull this evidence from is that there's a panel called the Robertson panel, which I thought was just strictly UFOs. It turns out it's government in general. It was a government appointed panel to look into the UFO disclosure at first. It only lasted a couple of years. But if you look through the UFO topic, and a lot of my information does come from Larry Hancock as well, too. When I'm looking through, like when I'm talking to him and he's talking about looking through these documents, there are plenty of accounts of people that, if they didn't have pension, none of these academics were even touching the topic of UFOs back then. It was so stigmatized, where literally you had people that would call you a crackpot conspiracy theorist, black label your whole record, all your history, all the awards you have doesn't mean jack shit. And people killed themselves. And that's where, for me, we can talk about a lot of like conspiracy stuff. That's my drawing line, is the dangers and what we would label as conspiracy and what we label as disinformation, misinformation. And I have points where I can understand both sides of this. But if you get to a point where someone is, checking outside their window like Uncle Vinny in one of those mafia movies, or you have someone that gets to the point where they feel like their life and their career is just down the drain because they've lost everything, because they've been black labeled so bad that they can't get anything. We know this in Hollywood. Blacklisting actors happens. All the Amber Heard's the best example right now. You get to that point where someone can now not do what they were originally doing before. You haven't just done the weirdest thing that everybody noticed in this pandemic, which is you can't do your routine. And we freak out when we can't do our routine. Life has changed. It's the only reason we don't get invested in problems overseas is because it doesn't affect our daily lives. If you're talking about maybe a gas increase, okay, but do you still go home? Do you watch your Netflix? Do you have your Wi-Fi? You don't raise enough eyes. But when we have a situation that affects your town, you're going to care about it because it's affecting you now. It's affecting maybe a way to work. It's affecting something that's right in front of you. It's why renewable energy is a good topic. Where do we want wind power? My town wanted wind power, wind turbines off our coast. You want wind energy, right? Everyone's like, yeah. Then they're like, okay, but we're going to build it off the coast. Oh, can you do it somewhere else where we don't see it? Oh, so you only want it if it's convenient to you, but you don't want to see it because it obstructs your view. I mean, it's this weird. I mean, it's not necessarily society's fault. It's a fact that we have been, I wouldn't say breaded this way, but we are kind of, wagyu in a sense.
NIMBY, right? Not in my backyard.
Yeah.
It's a thing for, yeah, sure.
But when we're thinking about the media, especially the media, we also need to realize too that as I showed in my film, and you've seen many times outside of that the CIA had people, or still have people, in place in major media. So it's not as if it's not just people self-censoring, scared to report something, knowing knowing any conspiracy topic is a third rail. but the information we're getting is being filtered through organizations like the CIA. Just another complication wrench I toss into the salad mix we're making here.
Or just look at what they did to Gary Webb. I mean, the CIA didn't do that to him directly. They murdered him by proxy. I mean, it's debatable whether or not I'll leave his actual death out of this, but as far as what led up to that, his own colleagues, took him to that point. So that was all done by them.
Jeff, in that case, it's almost like Pavlov's dog is how I characterize what happened with Webb, is that, a compliant media it was almost like, okay, Webb gets out a story about, obviously the CIA's dumping crack cocaine on the streets of LA and across America. It was almost like an automatic defense mechanism created by the media in major markets. They attacked the San Jose Mercury News. They attacked Webb because that's what they've almost been trained to do over the years in terms of the information. So I don't know if it's still a thing. We obviously had Operation Mockingbird, but by the 1980s, I'm not sure that was in effect. It was almost like it was the automatic reaction. It's what we always do when somebody suggests conspiracy against an institution like the CIA. Oh, and ultimately, I mean, the CIA in that story actually had some level of admission in their final report that, yeah, maybe we were involved with some people who were dumping drugs in a crack across America. But then the media paid no attention to that. Just again, like it's Pavlov's dog. Ring the bell, and the automatic defense mechanism.
This happened recently, but I saw a local newspaper was the one that reported on this, but there was that fucking truck with just a bunch of heads in it. Like, I mean, I don't know if anybody else came across that. There was a truck that had an accident and a bunch of heads came out. I can look it up on my phone, but I swear to God. And I'm like, it was a local newspaper that reported that. No, there was no giant news coverage. It's probably why you guys didn't see it on CNN or all these types of things. I was like, was that not trendy? I don't know. I don't know what was trending at the time, but I feel like that's like something, I don't know, that interests me. I would like to know more about that scenario more than a newspaper from the local news.
You're right, Robbie. There are things that there's so much happening now, and really right on the surface, that it's happening so often now that stories come and go. If you look at how many mass shootings are happening and the frequency of it, there's a lot more. They're not even reported. You have to go to the statistics to see all of it happening. It's just the few that the media needs to focus on that we hear about.
Here it is.
Jeff is in Rochester, close to Buffalo. Joe and I are right next door to Uvalde. So, but there's a lot more that's going on. Here's an example. You talk about the truck with the heads. You know what nobody ever talks about that just keeps coming into my head is the guy that blew up the van in downtown Nashville on Christmas Day. We never heard any more about that. We never hear any more about the Walmart mass shooting in El Paso. They come and go. They're happening so fast. They come and go. It's going to take us, if we get our think tank, the Center for Deep Political Research, up and running the way we envision it, with the funding that we envision, we have to start doing the history of all of these things. We have to do the research in all. This history has to be written. It has to be looked at.
I am programmed. I just want to say I am programmed because when I read this, I immediately go, oh, it says it was a medical truck. But then I still raise the question of like, do we have do we have head transplants? I don't think that's a thing yet. But it says A box of human heads was stolen from a truck in northeast Denver. According to Denver police, the incident happened between 2:30 p.m. Wednesday and 9:30 a.m. Thursday, while the truck was parked at a 7,700 block East 23rd Avenue. Police said the heads were supposed to be used for medical research purposes, but no classification of what do we call medical research. Maybe we have. I mean, do you want a new head? We can get you one.
That is just, I've not heard that story. That's just, I mean, yeah, that's right out of X-Files thing there, man. But that's how the media would characterize it, right? They call it X-Files stuff.
It was in March. So, I mean, I guess it was this year in March.
You know, Chris Carter, who produced X-Files, he in an interview I heard, and when the show was ending, he gave an interview on PBS, and he said that, you know, guys in the government, men in black, you know, types, would come to him all the time, come up to him all the time, and said, they would say, you have no idea how close you are to what's really happening. They told him that. And then they had the spinoff of the Lone Gunman series that only lasted a season or half a season. The premiere episode of the Lone Gunman was in late May of 2001, and the plot was a airliner was hijacked and then flown by remote control into the World Trade Center. This happened in May of 2001. You know, these things are called, I'm not going to get into this, guys, but look up Eugene Dinkin and psychological sets. I briefed you guys on this recently. I also briefed everybody on Charles Whitman, the famous University of Texas tower shooter, sticking of heads in a truck. There's a whole pathology, forensic pathology, medical aspect to that, where his brain is missing. There's a whole history that's been written about in recent years about the mystery of Charles Whitman's missing brain. Now, why is that significant? Because John Conlaw people formed a commission that was a blue ribbon commission to push forward this false idea that he had a brain tumor, and the brain tumor caused him to shoot all these people at the University of Texas. And there's a lot of skepticism about it that has been written. And then it turns out the way to settle it all is to get the guy's brain, which was preserved in the autopsy, but it went missing. And there's this big mystery about what happened to his brain. It was last seen in San Antonio. We got Joe looking for it down there now.
I'll get on that one.
Okay.
It is funny though. I mean, you just made me think. You know, tying this up to the front, right? Roe versus Wade, never mentioned in any of the stories, of course. You know that Wade is Henry Wade. That's the Wade of Roe versus Wade, right? And Henry Wade is also the guy that Errol Morris made the film The Thin Blue Line is about. The DA that's railroading people, particularly black people, into death row is the same guy. And you could, there's a story for somebody to write, tying all the way back to right now.
You mentioned the commission. I thought it's interesting, the discussion of a quote unquote commission. I would pose to you, when is the last time a quote unquote commission ever really got to the bottom of anything significant? The last legitimate government commission that really investigated properly and got to the truth of a matter. I think that's part of, I think, the frustration of the American public in the last 50, 60 years is, again, what I mentioned, this inability to get to the truth or some semblance of the truth. If we were just living in a pure authoritarian regime, and maybe before long we will, but it wouldn't matter. I mean, you can so much more difficult if we really want some semblance of an open democracy, that if our institutions don't do their job, don't follow through, don't get to the bottom of things, we're left with this status, this situation, you know. H.L. Mencken quote, my favorite, right? This is relatively easy to bear, justice stings. We just don't get to that. And too many of the things we've talked about fall into that category, I think, you know, where we're at.
Well, and if we do have a commission that's getting somewhere, it gets shut down and replaced by the Rockefeller Commission.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing that happens.
True.
You know?
Which is why
But
John
those things-
Judge, our mentor, John Judge, all of us here were very close and very heavily influenced by John Judge. And we sort of started CDPR as a follow-up continuation of his work. And he himself was a continuation of Mae Brussels' work. And so we're trying to continue this tradition. But John Judge was a very big influence on all of us. And of course, you know what he said, if you want a democracy, David, if you want a democracy, you have to solve the Kennedy assassination. It's that, that's the root right there.
I wanted to, because I was looking on my phone right now for this thing I had mentioned to Jeff about. They made this thing called Terror Toys, and actually Hasbro was funded to make these toys, but they were little figurines of terrorists. Like they look like kind of Osama bin Laden in a sense. But what they did was they painted this type of paint on it that when you turn the lights off, it showed like a devil face on the toy. And it was a propaganda tactic to make, you know, these kids look at these toys and, you know, lights off, whatever, they're playing with their toy at night, they're supposed to be asleep and they see a devil's face, and it was supposed to condition them into the aspect of terrorism as these are what terrorists are, and they're evil, they're the devil, and you should hate them. And it leads into something else. I couldn't find it, but I'll keep looking for it. But another thing I wanted to mention was the Blue Sky Memo, which I sent a couple of you already. The Blue Sky Memo, I just go, this is your answer right here to who killed JFK. The Blue Sky Memo was a document authored by the Central Intelligence Agency. The premise of the memo was to describe actions the CIA should undertake if it did not have to operate under legal, financial, and political restrictions. This to say, if the sky were blue. I mean, they're saying it in a document. I'm just saying I don't know. That's pretty damning for me.
John used to say this all the time. And I can't remember if it may even be in Randy's film where he's talking about CIA schleppers and how they don't really want the laws repealed. They're like, yeah, make it, you know, it's assassination. No, that's illegal. We never do that. You know, because it doesn't matter what the laws are. They're going to keep doing what they're doing. Right. And it's better to have a certain degree of plausible deniability by making it illegal. We'd never do Gladio here.
And I can bring up, when you sent me that Blue Sky memo, it immediately brought to my mind the Lewis Powell memo, which I wrote about in my essay, The Gordian Knot, which that essay began as my proposal for our Center for Deep Political Research think tank. And in 1971, Lewis Powell wrote a memo, and it was taken by the GOP. What he said in that memo, it was taken forward by the GOP as a blueprint on pushing everything politically in America to the right, to neutralize the left and, you know, push everything to the right of center and further, if possible. And they used that Lewis Powell memo as a blueprint. And it was Jonathan Marshall who pointed out, and I quoted him on this, that it built the think tanks. The right-wing think tanks were influenced to build after the Lewis Powell memo for the purpose of accomplishing this. And Jonathan Marshall said that the propaganda we hear today comes from the think tanks. When you want to get to the root of how to go after the media on this, you have to reverse engineer the Powell memo, and you have to reverse engineer the CIA memorandum that coined conspiracy theory as an epithet from 1967. And it's possible to do this. It may be what we are doing with CDPR may very well be impossible. We know that, but we see possibilities for how to do these things. So this is why we're trying to organize. John Judge said he was very optimistic that we would all this stuff, that we would get to the bottom of all this stuff, that it can be done. And it's in Randy's film. He said this is no reason for defeatism. These things can be done, and we have projects. We have developed projects. We want to continue doing that. Right now, we're just out of pocket, and we're just a group of ragtag volunteers, like the whole movement has been since Kennedy was shot. But we want to change that from a group of ragtag volunteers just doing this in our spare time. You know, the famous quote, when the going gets weird, the weird turn pro. That's what we want to do. We want to turn this pro.
Well, what exactly are some of the projects that you guys are thinking about doing?
We can't talk about all of them.
Can I have one?
But well, you know, we can talk. I'll talk in vague terms. We possibly have some records, some files that they're known to exist, but we may have a digital version of it, but we don't know. We don't know what's there. We need a couple $1,000 to restore this digital file, but that's all I'm going to say about it. We would like to seriously start reverse engineering the CIA document that went out to their media assets in '67 about how to deal with criticism of the Warren Commission conclusion. You know, they came up with this plan at the CIA. They brainstormed it, probably with the help of think tank, but think tanks, the CIA branches out into think tanks. It's all very vague. Somebody once said that back in the '60s, you couldn't tell where the CIA ended and the mafia began. But these days, it like branches out. We use CIA as an umbrella term, by the way. There's 17 known intelligence agencies and probably 3 times that many unknown that we won't hear about. We may hear about some of them. The NSA was finally made public. When was that? In the early 2000s or in the late 90s?
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
there
James
are,
Banford.
yeah. So, and the NSA was completely unknown. The CIA in its beginnings were completely unknown. So we use this alphabet soup as an umbrella term for all the really the deep state. Let's just call it the deep state. The bureaucratic intelligence services. If you want to personify the deep state in one person, you could any number of them. Alan Dulles was deep state. J. Edgar Hoover personified the deep state. It's not a difficult concept.
Well, how do you get people to actually affect change and want to be a part? I wouldn't say be a part of the deep political research, but actually want to question more as well too. Like I mentioned, if it's not something that's affecting their life, they're not going to do this. You have people like me that get a little bit interested in it. That's probably younger generations, at just the fact of what they can come across on the internet on a lot of articles and stuff too. But the influence of public opinion, even when I talk about the JFK assassination, even if I mention some of the experts that I've talked to, like you guys, people will just roll their eyes and just not want to be involved. And that shutting down of conversation is kind of even worse. It's not necessarily a public or social shunning, but it's an aspect of just wanting to throw your hands up like, I'm good, and walk away. Where I go, you know, there's the best example I could give to you is I asked my buddy a long time ago, you know, you take this toll road every single day, and one day you pop up to this toll booth and the price has changed. What are you going to do? You're going to probably do one of 2 options. You're going to turn around and go home, or you're going to pay the new fee. He goes, nope, I'm going to park my car until someone gives me a fucking quarter. And I go, that outside thinking to me, even though it's as joking as it is, I'm like, that shit that is what I would call that aspect of critical, not even critical thinking, but you can call it being a dick. But is it an aspect of they told you, they didn't give you any warning of changing a toll booth or whatever this type of situation is? But it's that outside thinking, that one thing you didn't think of, that makes you want to learn more about what that is and try and explore. Like when we go to this option of you can have the chicken or the fish. Okay, what else you got? There's chicken or the fish. It's never just two things. It's never just this is the road. It's the same thing with politics. I chose the lesser of two evils. Don't fucking give me that. I'm sorry. I can't sit with that answer when someone gives that to me. I just physically get sick. I don't care where you stand, Republican, Democrat, authoritarian, communist. I don't care, because none of them to me is a position of power. They're a face. And I think when you start questioning things like that, your answers become more broad and you start examining that into other aspects of your life.
Yeah, I think
Well,
actually
well,
there's one.
sorry, Joe.
Go ahead.
Essentially,
Yeah.
I mean, the organization is built on, the idea of research, education, and oversight, on the large scale view. Obviously, we've talked about, some of the ideas for research, but, the education, obviously there'll be programs that we're looking at, but how much that's gonna settle in, that's gonna depend on what people will receive. And like you said, that's who's gonna receive it. That's gonna depend. And we're gonna have to test the market out and find out. I hate to use the word market study, but or market analysis, but there is gonna have to be some degree of that, I think. And we're gonna have to see what works, what penetrates, what doesn't. And the oversiight's another component that that'll be something that we'll have to see how much we're going to get involved in, depending on lawyers and things like that. That these are types of things that take a great deal of funding. And but I think the research and the education are really where we're focused on. But again, as far as the education goes, that's going to be really what people will receive. We have to teach them how much the past relates to the future. And like we talk about all the time, this is still here today. This does affect your life, whether you want to believe it or not. Not everybody's going to take that home every day. I get it. We all have to pay our bills. We all have to pay $20 a gallon here for gas. For most of us, it's a hardship. I get that. But all we can do is what we can do, to try and get people to receive it. And then if they don't receive it, just like I did when I worked in politics, is if I cared about what I was doing, I didn't think that this person was going to receive my message, and I moved on to the next person. That's all that we can possibly do. But we create a record of what we're doing. Like Richard said, we're putting all this stuff down, and it's an institution, it's a record, and it'll be there, hopefully for many, many, many years. Hopefully for as long as it can stand.
I don't think we're going to educate ourselves out of this. We have to have the educational arm. And I think we focus on that now because it's really our comfort zone. Back in the old days, you could show the Zapruder film on national television and influence Congress to have a select committee, or you could have the church committee. Then you could do a feature-length film like Oliver Stone did, JFK, and you can influence the ARRB. You can create that and try to bring out the files, which so far has ultimately been, illegally sidetracked. But now, it's like everybody, once you have all of the string of what I call failures, they had their successes. They brought us to where we are today, but they didn't accomplish the ultimate goal, which was to resolve the whole thing, to bring it all out, stop the liars from lying. And so the education has to continue. Conferences have to continue, but we're not going to educate our ways out of this because we haven't up until now. They can form all the blue ribbon commissions they want, the 9/11 Commission. It just keeps happening over and over. The 9/11 families have very, very pertinent questions that still need to be answered. But the deep state knows how to neutralize all of that. And they're going to continue to do it. What I want to do is have an arm of our think tank that will go after that media think tank, deep state complex that knows how to neutralize this stuff. And you can study how they do it, and you can reverse engineer that. But and the best way that I came up with, like Robbie said, creativity is going to be a major part of it. We need to assemble creative, not only knowledgeable, but after you have the knowledge, Einstein said that imagination is more important than knowledge. You have to have the knowledge, but then you have to think about the knowledge imaginatively, creatively. We want to assemble the most knowledgeable and the most creative minds to figure out how to stop the lies. And even after we stop the lies, we have to force the deep state, the government, what's left of the government, the good parts of the government, they have to admit that all of this happened, and that elements of their own government caused it to happen. And then it becomes official. And only after it becomes official will most of the population accept it, because most people are raised to be authoritarian. You want people still today. I was at a hospital, local hospital yesterday, in the waiting room. TV's on the wall. It's on Fox News. Everywhere you look, it's like they have this contract with everybody in the public. If it's a public TV, it's switched to Fox News. And people take all this in and they take it as gospel. They still look at the news. Joe Green said in a podcast he did in Australia recently that it's all gibberish. He watches the news and it's all gibberish. If you know what we know, they lie about one thing, and then another guy lies about another thing, and then they debate which lie is the best, version of the truth. It's gibberish. It's just all gibberish. And people drink this in as the authoritarian truth. And only when these lies are officially admitted to will the mass public go along with it. But we can get into it. They're a minority and we're a minority. Wars are always fought by minorities, going back to the prince.
Well,
But we feel like we can do this. We have creative ideas in place now. One of the things we haven't figured out yet, we have a short list. I wanted to say to you earlier, Robbie, we come from a generation where the reason we don't talk about UAP as much, and all you have to do is look at my Twitter to know that I'm a UFO experiencer. We don't talk about it because we come from that whole tradition where it's a major taboo. And if you want to accomplish anything, if you want to write about and research the Kennedy assassination, and you want to have any credibility at all, the history of that is that you don't go into UFOs. We saw Jim Mars do it, but that was after JFK came out, and he had already accomplished a lot with the book Crossfire and his research into the JFK assassination. And then he went and did secret, he did Alien Agenda, the book Alien Agenda, which is the crossfire of UFO research. But there have been some excellent documentaries out recently, and we did have Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which was the JFK of UFO research. But we have discussed, talk about projects. We have discussed also adding UAP into it, because that has to be done. The government has kept all of that secret, and we have to go into that. So much to do.
Well, they admitted
But
to
we
it now.
looked
They
at-
made court hearings on it.
We know about the TTSA. We know about how they got funded. My personal model, I was excited when TTSA, To the Stars Academy. I was excited when they got their rock and roller guy with all these millions of dollars to fund them. You know, we're asking for a pittance. All we need to get up and running. Right now, we're out of pocket. Jeff and I are probably, 10,000 or more out of pocket for the last 4 years or 6 years. But we all contribute in whatever way we can, and our time is money too. And so what we're operating on a shoestring. We're just trying to keep our lines of communication open, our digital footprint open, and we're trying to get a website that won't be eaten by the internet, attacked, hacked. We need funding that is not going to be attacked by the international bankers, and it's a tough problem, and we have to find a creative way to be funded. Not much. You look at the budgets of think tanks, the ones, and you never see. Where have you ever seen a podcast where all the leaders and founders of a think tank got together and talked about their think tank? It doesn't happen. Think tanks operate conspirationally. They operate secretly. And we will have to do that too. And we do it. We talk about our stuff more than they do. They're up to no good, though. We're up to good. We're a think tank for truth, and we're trying to do good trouble. We're trying to get into good trouble. But that's where we are. That's a very tough, just the legal aspects of becoming incorporated. Jeff and I have gone around and around with this. The reason we're not currently incorporated, we were incorporated, but we had doubts about the limits of certain types of incorporation. So we were incorporated in West Virginia for a while, and then we were incorporated in Rochester for a while. But we pulled all that down because we want to get a lawyer that we can trust, who knows this stuff, that can advise us on the best form of incorporation to do that will allow us to accomplish our goals and still protect us from being shut down because we did the wrong thing. So I'll shut up on that now.
That was the sales pitch.
That was, yeah. We're trying to hone down the elevator pitch, though. I'm trying to get it down to like 1 minute.
I'm in. I mean, if I had money to invest in you guys, I'd do it. But I get into this aspect of like, are you surprised that something like that isn't backed
Rob.
by?
You become the next Joe Rogan. You become the next Joe Rogan, and you fund us.
I wish. No, but you get into this aspect. I mean, if you're doing a thing for deep state or deep political research, in a sense, I mean, if you're looking for funding, I think me and Jeff talked about it. It would have to be nonprofit. I think a lot of people would like to know about it as well too. But the way that that's got to be set up is got to be subscription based. It's got to be like how a Patreon is. The issue is if you have people trying to donate a certain amount of money once and then having to keep coming back to donating. The thing about people is they like the routines, and if you tell them they're getting a $5 charge a month, depending on what it is, more likely than not, they're going to go look into it. Now, this all comes from John Callis. He made Black Phone. He made a bunch of these apps and encrypted web servers and stuff like this. And he talks about it. He goes, I'll donate to an artist, somebody that's like this, if I like their content, if I like the stuff that they're putting out. He goes, but what companies do is when they do a subscription-based thing, they ask you for a card on file because they know if every single time they have to ask you to make this charge for this certain app, are you sure you want to purchase this app? Or are you sure want to pay this monthly prescription or thing for this? You're more likely there's like a 75 or 70% chance you'll say no because you probably don't use the app anymore. So it's just easier if you have your card on file, which is what iPhones and things do. When you sign up for a subscription, they do a reoccurring thing, and they keep doing that over and over again. So they don't have to ask you. They can just take the money out, even if you're not even using the site anymore. I know so many people that don't check their card over a $5 charge. And it's real. It's something you guys should set up. It's the reason why people have Patreons as well too. It's ease of access, but it also gets into this point of like, you look at the same exact thing where they say, are you sure you want to pay this money for your card? Things that are smart and very financial, good decisions you should be making of checking your profile and all that. Take that to social media. Make a social media account that tries to get over a certain amount of followers, and you start wondering why when someone requests to follow you, a message pops up and says, are you sure you wish to follow this person? They don't do that normally. You can follow any other person that wouldn't be deemed controversial or talking about a subject in this matter. I mean, it's that's shadow banning in a sense. I mean, your channel can be shadow banned. There's things out of your control when it goes to bigger systems, which relies on other things like Rumble, relies on the idea of, I wouldn't even say the app really panned out, but whatever that Truth Social app was, it sucks. Don't use it. I was in a waiting line, 700,000 for a month straight. I was like, I'm fucking doing this. But you get into this aspect of like, people turn to these types of things, and you don't know if that's an incentive of this person created an app with the idea of free speech, and it's not. And then you get into a thing like this. So when we talk about the nonprofit part of this, you have your name of it is great. I love it, but it's going to also link you in with the conspiracy stuff as well too, which you are talking about. You are expressing there are real things and you have your evidence to back it up, but it's just the way society's programmed right now, which taking out that programming is also a first step as well too. Take a timeline from when the media started to where they're at now. Take a timeline from when the government started to where they're at now. Take a timeline on all these crucial aspects of things. Find where it says that they've stopped or where they have shifted, and you can target it. I bring up the same example with the Kennedy assassination. That was a way of them succeeding in a shitty way. They almost got caught, skin of their teeth. But then look what all the events that follow afterwards. Very noticeable and very things that were like, you could have did a better job at covering that up. We have so much evidence after the assassination compared to before the assassination, where you just go, they got away with it. And they're like, well, fuck it. Do people read? And they start doing shit. That's what I'm saying is like, it starts evolving, and you can look at this anywhere. Actually, diving into the topic of bioweapons and chemical weapons, I talked to a couple of historians on those matters. And, it's very good to preface it with the aspect you can't look in from 2020 vision on something back then. But if you get into what they talk about, I mean, I brought up the idea of the ban. I was like, was the ban just something that was on paper? Like, I mean, they obviously evolved it into different methods and things of that sort as well, too. And they go, it's funny is in the ban, it's this idea of like, we realize it's destruction for both of us. No winner. It's kind of just hurting the people around us. And he goes, doesn't that sound weird compared to what we're dealing with today? People look back on something like that and go, what happened? Where did we go wrong? No, maybe just they were always the same. And now we're starting to notice a lot of the issues because of how society's changed. And they actually have documents that this guy was telling me about where people had spoken about, like, it just wasn't financial. You got to make all these to make biological weapons. You need a giant plant. You need to be running it all the time. You need to storage all the things that you make. And then next thing you know, how are you going to use it if you're not in war? I mean, it's good if you're in war 24/7, but necessarily are you fighting a war that the public knows about 24/7? No, there's more individual crises. And then you turn on an inside population, which is, again, a big concern as well, too.
We've talked about all that every day for the last, since 2016. And before that, when we were talking about the proposal for a think tank and how to fund it, we've turned it every which way we can. We're not financial geniuses, but we can do research. We've researched it. We looked at how other think tanks are funded. We've looked at their budgets. We know the dangers of, certain kinds of funding. We've actually, you say you have to just start. Well, we did. Jeff started JFK murder investigation. That was his first attempt at an organization. And we were all there, Joe and Jeff and I. And I told you about, privately, I told you about the battles that we faced. And, you jump in and you do something and it backfires on you. And you learn not to do that again. We've done that over and over. This is our latest attempt to do it. We're trying to be more careful this time. We're trying to use the lessons we learned from our past failures. And that was a brilliant 5-minute review of the possibilities for funding. And of course, it'll be nonprofit, but there are different types of nonprofit. We've looked into all this. We're at the point where we need a lawyer who really knows this stuff to tell us, okay, we have a multiple choice. Which one should we go with? What are the pitfalls of that? What are the advantages of it? We're at that point. But you know what? Lawyers cost money. So like I said, our out of pocket, we have our day jobs because, you know, we're the money that CDPR is getting is automated. It's just coming out of our paychecks right now. We're out of pocket on a shoestring. And like I said, we're going to have to find, if we get funding like TTSA did, or other think tanks have done this too, you have to find a like-minded individual. And we do have a short list. There are some surprise, some of them had died recently, but some of it would surprise you who thinks like we do, who's a celebrity with a lot of money.
Woody Harrelson.
Or an accomplished person with a lot of money. And we have a short list. You know, I've never worked in the development area where you contact people and ask for money. Patreon, you know, we've talked about that. We've talked about self-funding kinds of situations like that. There's not a lot we can offer to people, though, to tell them why they should send us money. And it is automated, but somebody has to maintain it. Somebody has to keep up with it. And you look at Jeff and I look at the analytics of our current CDPR Facebook page, talk about social media. It's downright scary. We put out there that we were interviewing for an internship for a while. And the people that applied, you know, we've been around the block. We didn't just get off the truck yesterday. We know what an intelligence profile looks like. And the people who applied for our internship were downright frightening. The analytics, the people who do check-ins, we don't encourage check-in. There's nothing to check in with CDPR. But we have this whole list of check-ins with CDPR on our Facebook, and they're all from foreign countries. They're all from the like obscure Middle Eastern European, scary stuff, man. We're trying to build something that we have to be protected as we build it. And once it's built, we have to be protected once it's there. And I've been through this with editorial cartooning. The newspapers dumped editorial cartoonists, and they're like, it's been every man for himself. There's maybe 20 staff cartoonists now. Some of the survivors went to Patreon and other self-funding online groups, but that turned into just, you're begging for money. You're constantly begging for money just to do what you were once paid to do. And that gets old too. So these are just some of our problems. And like I said, every day, we've discussed this every day for many years now. We've looked at all the angles. We still come up with creative new angles, and we play with those. So it's not like we're not doing anything. But we know the problems, and we know that we've failed in certain areas, and we're trying to avoid those pitfalls as we go forward.
Well, as we know, John Judge attempted to do it all on his own when he tried to start the May Brussels Research Center, and he was sabotaged pretty quick. So we're really trying to do what only he's done.
We see how others are sabotaged too. We see how we were sabotaged, and still, you know, there's still attempts at it. Talking about what Randy said about the Men in Black showing up with him, I wrote it in my book. And once you get past the major essays, the update portion of the Rambler essay, I just went out there just to protect myself. I told the stories about the weird stuff that happened to me while I was still at UT and then after I left UT. They created a hostile workplace. They found out what I was doing, by the way. I wasn't really keeping it all that secret. I was going around talking to lots of people around campus, And I was finding dirt on some of the most sacred cows in the UT administration that had ever been, Harry Ransom, people like that. And when they found out that I was finding all this stuff and interviewing people and writing about this stuff, the Institute for Latin American Studies and how that got started, DeMorenschildt gave them the idea for it. When they found out I was writing all this stuff down for publication, possibly, things turned around. I was a valued employee for 10 years. I did some great stuff that I did at UT. Some of my design work ended up in a time capsule that's buried at UT that won't be uncovered until 2083. So they liked me, and I was doing good stuff. And they had a one-man show of some of my artwork there at UT. But then it all turned around once they found out what I was writing. And I don't blame my boss. My boss actually protected me all this. David Price, I write about him. He died in the midst of all this, and it was not until he died that the wolves, the fangs, came out. The night of long knives came out against me, turned into an immediate hostile workplace environment. Nothing I could do was right. Everything I did was wrong. I saw the writing on the wall. I managed to resign before they were building a case to fire me. I managed to resign before that happened. And then afterwards, the guy that replaced me was a CIA guy. They replaced me with the guy who was in the graphic arts, but he was a CIA guy. And people later privately, they told me privately at the time, here's who this guy really is, And then later on, the guy who became my new boss after David died, he told me at a party later on, he said, that guy that we hired to replace you, that dude's CIA, man. I said, hey, I figured that out at the time. Because they had to move somebody in to figure out how much my little staff of people that I worked with every day for 10 years, how much they knew about what I had found. They had to put a lid on this. But I went ahead and that's when I got, this was 91. By 93, I had my manuscript out there. I knew to protect myself, I had to put that whole thing about UT out there publicly, put a spotlight on myself, because the weird stuff did fall off after that once I had the spotlight on myself. But I'm still blacklisted. There's no way no matter how qualified I am, there's no job at UT that anybody would hire me for. There's no job in the state of Texas that anybody would hire me for as a public position. So, we've had our battles. I told you, Robbie, we've had our battles.
Well, you mentioned the things that you can't talk about. You just understand that when you're getting funding or something, people want to know that you are talking about a topic. And what you just mentioned and what's Randy has mentioned as well, too, they're intimidation tactics. They're tactics being used on you. That's your sell point. That's your whole thing that you should be talking about, things that you can clearly lay out that aren't controversial, aren't going to get blacklisted. You're just talking about being intimidated and feeling uncomfortable in a situation. That's half the market of the world right now. People want to hear that because people know what that experience is like. It makes it relatable. Those are things you can't talk about. I mean, if you talk about a controversial topic, like we were talking about kind of in the beginning, a lot of like that kind of stuff. I mean, there's few things that'll get you blacklisted off the internet. I'm the one that's in fear of losing a channel. That would be it. So, I mean, when you talk about these types of situations, intimidation tactics, it just, for me, I'm listening to it. I believe them. You guys have the credits. It's the same thing when Gary Aguilar came on my show. The man's credible as hell. You don't get anything by entertaining what people would call a conspiracy if you didn't believe it, if you didn't think it to be true. You have everything to lose in that aspect of things. And that's important. People want to hear that side of, you guys as well, too. They want to hear you talk about, the stuff of trying to design the company. And the next thing you know, it being like your website's getting eaten up every single time. Just simple stuff like that. It doesn't have to be so conspiratorial, but just showing people like, it's not like we're just sitting and just expecting it to fall in our lap, which I know that's not what it is. I wouldn't try and insult it at all. Trust me, I'm not. I hope you didn't take it that way. But I think that's an important.
this is probably actually helping doing these podcasts. This is the most notoriety and attention that our group has ever had. You know, nobody knew who we were except for the inside our little bubble at the conferences, JFK conferences, and still most of them don't know who we are. But we kept cranking along. But now, Jeff, if you want to do a Patreon, Robbie may be right. That may replace our out of pocket, at least. I don't see it funding us, but it might be better than we ever thought it was up until this time because of this notoriety that we're getting from Robbie. So I'm for that. I don't want to nix any ideas, but we just, if you think it'll work, let's try it. We just don't have any time either. Got our day jobs.
Robbie, you mentioned something that, and I think you're right about the public yearning for information and yearning for truth. I mean, how else could I possibly explain getting 200 people at my local library branch for a PowerPoint presentation on the JFK assassination? People want to learn that. People want to learn about things like the Dreyfus Affair that was from the late 1800s, but then wasn't resolved until 2013. And this is a whole nother thing we can go into at another time. But, I use the example that people say, why does this matter? And I say, well, because one reason, for example, for 50 years, people would point at Area 51 and say, that's a secret base. And the US government said, no, that doesn't exist. Gaslighting the people that were literally standing right there looking at the base, saying it doesn't exist. And then in the 2000s, they said, okay, it exists. It was there the whole time. And that makes those people, for 50 years, those people were called insane. That no, there's no secret base out there. What are you talking about? And then they just said, okay, it's there. And then, but it's that kind of thing that people are yearning for the truth. People are yearning to know that they know something isn't right. They just don't know quite what it is that isn't right. And I think that a group like ours is really hitting on that. I think that's one reason CDPR matters.
Yeah, and to jump off that, that's what I was going to say earlier, is that actually, so in a strange way, the Trump movement is not 100% negative in my view, only because it does demonstrate that people are fed up with the current system. They are aware they're being screwed. They have fallen for the idea that they're being screwed because of immigrants and Black people and LGBTQ people, and people they don't like, which is obviously incorrect. But they are ripe for change. And so if you could get into that, if you could tap into that with education, then you might be able to turn this thing around a little bit. Because people are completely aware, and everyone I meet just in general has this sense that everything is collapsing, that the United States is in this period of time where we're on the slope down. I was talking to a guy recently, he's a guy who works at a place where you buy appliances, and we were talking about the Soviet Union, how in the Soviet Union, nothing works. Maybe you buy the ticket and maybe it's there and maybe it's not, or you're trying to get something shipped and maybe it gets there and maybe it doesn't. And we are slowly becoming accustomed to that being the case. I don't know what it's like with you guys, but here in San Antonio, maybe the store is open and maybe it isn't. And you look on the internet and it says it's open, you go there and it's like it's boarded up. Or you go someplace and there's only 2 people working in this giant store and then nothing's. So you have this sense that everything is kind of on this downslope, we can tap into that. I mean, people are correct. You are being screwed. It's just that we're not being screwed by, the people you don't like.
Well, you guys, to me, since I've talked to you guys all individually, even though a lot of it was specifically on the Kennedy assassination, I mean, you guys aren't blowing smoke up my ass on things. So I think I can take you guys for what you guys say and what you guys say here now. It's face value. I can tell that this is I haven't seen the organization as a whole do all its background stuff that you're not going to discuss on the show. That's fine. You keep it in secret. I'll just cry in my free time. But we get into an aspect of, there's a lot of my own, I've done 1,000 something of these. I can notice a sales pitch. I get that aspect of things, but there are also things I believe in as well too. And what made me question more, my endeavor into diving into it, and why I like the idea of a deep political research organization that can call out these types of things. Not only did I feel comfortable, I was like, oh shit, finally I get to talk about all the stuff that whenever I even bring up a sliver of it to a guest, I got to like pause and stare at them like, please don't look at me like I'm a crackpot or anything like that. Is because there are some people that have seen what I've seen, probably other things even more, deeper research into certain topics, could be the JFK assassination, and notice this type of stuff. I had an episode, I talked to a guy who studies the supply chain. He works in Pennsylvania about managing the supply chain. And I go, how much does the media, and like, how sensitive is the supply chain? I always hear about it. Like Jif was a big example because there was a scandal with Jif. He goes, you know what happens is people get riled up. They go to the store and they stockpile it all. And then next thing you know, you have real issues when people panic buy. He goes, they tell you Jif is out. You can choose another fucking peanut butter. There's 1,000 of them there. But now that they told you that this one's gone and you can't get it, you want it even more. He goes, the supply chain can get fluctuated by the media. And you start realizing the media is rolling it all. I mean, it's not just government, maybe government tied in with media, but there's like real things like you could talk about. You mentioned Rich being in the hospital and seeing Fox News on the television. I work at a gym. Whenever same person usually comes in, a couple of people come in, same exact people will say, hey, why don't you have Fox on the TV? Hey, why don't you have CNN on the TV? Why don't you have this? I'm like, it's like programming. And you get into this aspect of things of like, look, every time they get sued for something they get incorrect, they get out of a clause, a little loophole in their thing that says we're the same, we're entertainment. But it's like, no, you're news. You say it in your name. No, we're entertainment. And we classify the same qualification as WWE. And as you just raised that red flag, but the issue is that it's on the TV. It's set up in the professional sense of wearing a suit, flashy things popping across the screen, news that is actually occurring. But you realize that you can have, I have seen this at my work. We have 3 TVs near the cardio section, Fox on the left, CNN on the right, and then you have MSNBC in the middle. And they're all saying the same shit, but they're all spinning it in different directions. And it's like, to me, it was like a revelating moment of like, I get it now. Like everyone's got their own bias. Everyone's got their own perspective. And I've understood that through doing the show too. But I mean, even with things where I just can't take things at what anybody really says, not you guys, I'm saying just media in general, at face value. I have no clue what people are actually thinking about doing. That second question in the back of my head that makes me question more things. When all of media was shitting on Ukraine before Russia decided to do all this stuff. And now they immediately turn it like, oh my God, we got to send love to Ukraine. If you can't notice that and question that and just say that's fucking weird, then we're in a crazy spot. I mean, I don't know if that's an attention span issue. I mean, that leads down a darker path. I think a lot of us are being exposed to things on a daily basis, and necessarily it's really hard to keep in your memory. I just pulled that thing from March, the heads in the truck and all that. To me, that's old news. You asked me, when did that happen? I would have told you last year. It's because there's so much coming out and it's so much being shoved in your face 24/7. And here's another weird thing you should question. There are only 2 countries in the world where pharmaceutical companies advertise. That is New Zealand and the United States. Everybody else thinks it's weird. So when you think like we look over at another country and say, that's weird, that's horrible, thank God we don't live over there. I mean, we look at China, everything that goes on over there, horrible stuff. It can happen here. We're not the exemption. Nobody's the exemption. It's about noticing when you need to start sparking up change. And it doesn't mean storming a Capitol. It does not what that mean at all. It's not inciting violence. What it is just noticing BS sales pitches, noticing when the media is feeding you a story, noticing when they just care about your attention. They don't really care about you.
Adam?
Well said.
There's a great book. I'm going to go ahead and mention it because you touched on it. There's a book called Into the Buzzsaw by Christina Borgeson that deals with the article, what you were talking about at the very beginning, Fox News in Florida, the court case where the judge said that the media does not have an obligation to tell the truth because it's entertainment. That had to do with milk coming out of cows in Florida, believe it or not. But that story, among a whole bunch of other great stories, is in that book by Christina Borges. Highly recommend.
I guess I'll say something else. But a bigger thing also in it too is when you get into these situations where we have panic. We talk about displacing fear. It does curb change. Censorship curbs thoughts. When you shun information or you say this, the internet's kind of sold like a library, and it's not really that, because they just don't tell you things aren't there. It's kind of like the Freedom of Information Act. It works to a point until you want like classified documents of JFK, and they're like, oh no, we can't give you that. But it's like about guessing the date. And I just go, if they tell you it doesn't exist and it exists, that's even crazier. They'll put a web search, Google will, or Amazon, whoever you want to say, they can put something at like the 10th page and you can find it still. But we're entering a time now where they'll just not have it there. And you start going, so is this fake? Is this not real? And it could be real. And that's even scarier in its own.
Yeah, we're real even if we have a web page or not. We all go back to before the internet. So we can be real without a web page, but we do know the reality that most people don't think you're real unless you have a web page. Jeff designed a fabulous web page. It's one of the best web pages I've ever seen. Even when it was big and flowing in all directions, it was fantastic. And then he had to hone it down to a smaller version, and he can still put up that smaller version, which we're going to do. It's just going to be a bookmark, kind of a page, a splash page kind of thing. But the graphics are fantastic. The flow, the design of it is fantastic. And hopefully, we can start building it out again. We've got all the files are there. We've got all the files. We just need to find a home for it where it will survive and be secure. But what's secure on the internet? We have to expect that it will be attacked again. And, that's why we sort of have and we're inspired by a group going back to Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. There was a group called the White Rose Resistance Movement. Sophie Scholl and her brothers Hans Scholl, they were your age. Hans was 24, she was 21. And they had another group of professors, like we have David Denton. They were all in University of Munich, the students were. They had served in Hitler Youth. They had seen the rise of all of this. Hans was in the army. They began writing like we have. They began writing. They saw all this stuff. This is why we know that the average person paying attention, the students mainly, they saw what was happening in Nazi Germany. They saw the disaster was coming. They knew what Hitler was, like we know what Trump is. And they started doing pamphlets. This was 1944, 43. And they got a little printing machine, and they started cranking out these pamphlets. And then they had to distribute them secretly. See, I talk about the secret aspects of what we do. They had to take these pamphlets and sneak them out and like toss them around, leave them in strategic places around the university and around town. But eventually, Hans and Sophie were distributing some at the university, and they had to get out of there because the classes were about to be let out, and they could get caught, with the pamphlets on their person, and they knew the dangers of getting caught with them. Yeah, arrest and what eventually happened. But anyway, but in kind of a panic, wanting to get these pamphlets away from herself, right before the classes let out, and the hallways were going to be full of people, and she was on this balcony. You can see this all in a film. It's brilliantly done in a movie called Sophie Scholl. And
I already
she
know
just
my part to play in your group.
she takes her satchel of pamphlets and just tosses them over the balcony, and they go flying down onto the ground. Well, there was a maintenance guy, there was a janitor that saw this, and he reported them, described them. The Gestapo tracked him down, arrested him. Sophie and Hans were given like a trial, like the next day. They were imprisoned overnight. They were given a trial the next day. This is all in the movie. And they were beheaded. They were executed by guillotine within 48 hours. Some other members of the group weren't executed until July. We've just passed the anniversary of their deaths. But it was brutal, but they knew the dangers, and they went to their deaths proudly. Sophie's last word that she shouted before the guillotine chopped her head off was Freiheit, which is German for freedom. And their pamphlets are brilliant, and they are applicable today. I would urge you to go on Twitter and follow the White Rose Project. It's a group of academics in Europe that are at Cambridge that are doing all keeping the history alive of the White Rose resistance movement, and Sophie and Hans and the rest of the group. And they acknowledge the anniversaries of their deaths. They tell the whole story of them. They have young students that are doing research papers on the pamphlets. A new book is out that have translated all of the pamphlets and analyzed them, and because they are relevant today. And they spoke directly to the German people, the good Germans who thought, we'll just be authoritarian. We'll go along with the government because who are we to, resist the government? And they were telling them, no, you have to resist. We're heading for destruction. We know this is happening. They talked about the Holocaust. They knew the Holocaust was happening. And they put it all out there in these pamphlets. It's amazing to read them. It's the way we write. It's the way we research and write. We're telling people things that they know, but they don't want to know it. And they certainly don't want to let anybody else know they know it. But we're doing it, and we follow the example of the White Rose, and we may end up like them, but they are the essence of bravery. There are now memorials in public places in Berlin, in Munich, that honor them, statues and things. Yeah, they were despised and arrested, and everybody distanced themselves from them back then. It's just an amazing story, but you got to do it. You got to show that courage in the face of the kind of evil that Nazi Germany was, and the kind of evil, beginning with Paperclip, beginning with a guy named James Burnham that I wrote about, that George Orwell wrote about. You can find an essay George Orwell did called Second Thoughts on James Burnham. And you read his definition of where the government was headed. And yeah, he was a political science guy at Harvard. He's the guy who introduced E. Howard Hunt to William F. Buckley Jr. And the two of them, through the offices of Allen Dulles, went to Mexico City and founded and started up the Mexico City station for the CIA in the early mid-50s. And I write about all this in my book too, because I found out about all of it through the you mentioned the Da Vinci Code. The guy that owned this Rambler, he created the Da Vinci Code. He turned his little Rambler, 59 Rambler station wagon into a Da Vinci Code. And there were clues with the car that led to clues in the library that led to clues elsewhere. And that's how I learned all this stuff. People ask me, how did you do all this in-depth research? How did you figure out to go look? I just followed George Wing's clues, the professor who owned the car. And I didn't solve the whole code. There's more to it. I left some things, but I tell you in the book, I say, analyze this stuff. Here's a lead. Go to this library here. Look this up. Tell me what you see. Look at these photos, a Richard Sprague collection. There are photos of Ramblers in the back parking lot behind Dealey Plaza. And you can't, in the films that we see on the internet and in books and things, they're too fuzzy to make out the license plate numbers. But if you went to the negatives in the Richard Sprague collection, I bet you could read those license plates. I couldn't do it all. I couldn't travel all over the country and do it. But I left those leads there, and very few people have taken up some of that stuff. There's a lady named Linda Miner who lives here in Texas, in Killeen. She has actually followed up and done some brilliant work on some of that stuff, but there's leads that nobody has followed. More projects. These are finishing the work that we started, that we wrote about. It's all there. That's the beginning. I guess that's something I could tell people that we want to do, is just continue to finish the research that we started. That's the basic mission of CDPR, right there. So there you go. But the courage of the White Rose Resistance, that's sort of our mascot. That's sort of our role model. And we're proud of that. And that's why when I'm with my group here, I wear my white rose.
Well, it always leads to the thing of when someone says, oh, someone else will do it, or someone else will get to it whenever someone has an idea. Well, that keeps happening, and then no one stands up. So somebody's got to, right? And
yeah, Sophie Scholl, famous quote. Sophie Scholl said that somebody had to make a start. And that's sort of one of our mottos.
Well,
Somebody has to make a start.
I found the part I wanted to play, and the part I want to play is, the simplest thing that you can do is, see how I have my own merch right here? Just send me if Teespring is free. I can just create you guys a site, create some designs. You get shirts.
Jeff created a bunch of great looking merch, and we had it out on our tables at the conferences. So yeah, we've done that. We've been there.
Well, if you create a Teespring or you create one of these shirt sites, it's free. And then I think you have to funnel in like how much you're going to charge, and it'll be how much you make from it. I mean, but then people can just order it from the site and get it shipped. Like I don't have to ship or make any of the shirts myself. People order them off the site and it gets sent right to you. It's a good way. I mean, I see kids wearing this YouTuber shirt, and the shirt is Virginity Rocks on it. And they're like 6-year-old, 7-year-old kids walking around with a shirt that says Virginity Rocks. The parents have no fucking clue what it means, but the kids do because they know the YouTuber. And I go, that's a simple way of getting your message out there. Then also, instead of just doing your conferences in Dallas, expand out. Go to other conferences. You're going to find a lot of like-minded people that question the same exact things, but it's the aspect of how much of it gets reported on social media, and a good portion of it doesn't. And for dissenting views or whatever you want to say, that could be an aspect of people just, taking them off because they don't like that content, or they're going to flag it, or whatever you want to say. But there's podcasts, a lot of them that talk about they go a little bit deeper than just corruption. They go deeper into like Anaki and all this crazy stuff that get out there. I lose track a little bit. So I try and ground myself in the things that I can look at. And that is a human that runs an organization or is in charge of an organization who might not have your best interest at heart. And I think that's
as you know, Robbie, two of our guys here, David Denton, Randy Benson, they are on the board of the Dallas conference. David has his own conferences in Olney, Illinois, and in Kansas, and he in 2014, when I just was beginning to spread this word, this idea I had about a think tank, it was at his conference in Alexandria, Virginia, the JFK Historical Group. He runs that. So we are into the conferences big time now, and we're continuing those. Um, and we'll just let your audience know that that's who these two guys are. Randy has done one of the great documentaries on those of us who are searchers, researchers, and he's keeping his hands in all that. Uh, Joe is in filmmaking and playwriting, and I may go and have dinner with him and Max Good coming up at the San Antonio Film Festival. And so I get to meet Max Good. So we're keeping our hands into all of this stuff. Yeah, we're doing what we can.
David needs a chair with some back support.
Yeah, I tell you what, 2 hours sitting in one place, I thought I was gonna go into rigor mortis there, but I'm good now. I stood up, man.
I was trying to, you were giving me the silent treatment. I was trying to say something that would get you to be like, yes, he's right about something. You know, never mind.
That might have to be a selling point on Patreon. Just get a chair for David.
Chair for David.
Right.
Now,
Now we're all creative types. We have senses of humor. I was a political cartoonist. Joe has a great sense of humor. We all
actually, I was going to get you to make a design for me because I was looking at some of your political cartoons and I was like, these are really good.
Go to my Facebook professional page, Richard Bartholomew at facebook.com, and you'll see a gallery of the various different types of work that I've done. Everything from oil paintings to logos to T-shirts. I've done a ton of T-shirts. I almost wore one of them, the University of Pflugerville, which its emblem is the CIA emblem because of the spookiness of my little town that I live in. Yeah, so yeah, we've even done T-shirts. But you know, once you can do that and you can raise small amounts of money, but somebody has to keep doing it. Somebody has to manage all that, you know, and we're researchers. We want to, we can't leave our day jobs and our research and do merch, you know, although we're trained to do that. We've done that as our day jobs. And we've done it for our group here, but there's only you can only spread yourself so thin. And so here lately, we've just continued with as much of our research as we can and the conferences and speaking and showing up on your podcasts, which we thank you for. We're doing all we can do, you know, and we're struggling to come up with new ideas.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about shop probably off air about it, but I got some ideas that I can do some things as well too, not just give you guys a platform, which I'm always happy to do. I enjoy talking to each individual of you guys, especially about the Kennedy assassination. But you guys have other aspects of things I would like to do another episode about as well too. But yeah, we could. I got a few things I could probably be able to do, at least creative wise, to help get the message out there too. My generation likes shirts. My generation likes stickers. My generation likes a bunch of crazy, weird shit. But
So
it's
do we.
cool. So I'll make sure that I'll toss out some ideas. Rich will probably talk off air as well too. But guys, please, you guys have given me enough of your time talking for 2 hours. Where can people find your links? Let's start with Jeff. We'll go to Joe, then we'll go to David, then we'll go to Rich, and then we'll end with the amazing creator of the Searchers, Randy.
So until the main website is launched, everything will be at CDP Research, at CDP Research, at Twitter, at Facebook. You can find us on YouTube, and sooner rather than later, the website will be up.
Yep.
Okay. Joe Green, JFK. Simplest thing in the world. Also, the Hidden History site and Say Something Real Press is my small imprint. But Joe Green, JFK leads to everything that I'm involved with. So.
I'm on JFK Historical Group. You just that link will take you directly to our website. And again, as Richard's been saying, we are having a major conference in November in Dallas, November 17th through 20th. We encourage everybody to consider coming back to that after 2 or 3 years of pandemic. A lot of JFK researchers like to gather in Dallas and folks interested in the case, and we look forward to seeing folks. So you can find information about that as well on the JFK Historical Group website. And hey, thanks for having us. We appreciate the time to share some ideas. Definitely.
Rich.
You can find a great page that Joe did for me at Say Something Real Press / Bartholomew, my last name. And if you take off the last 3 letters, MEW, and you add VIEWS and just search that, or just go to any social media that's at Bartholomew's. That's my handle on social media. And right now I'm mostly, mostly Twitter. I've got an Instagram I don't do much with. I'm doing less on Facebook, but I tend to put on Facebook certain things I put on Twitter. But you can keep up with me through social media and like that.
And you can find me at thesearchersfilm.com, and that'll link to everything else. And I want to thank you, Robbie, very much for having us.
It was a pleasure. I really do appreciate the time you guys have given me to be able to chat on this, and also individual episodes as well too, and teaching me a little bit about the assassination of JFK and our discussions that we had. I know it's a lot to cover. It definitely can't be done in like a podcast episode, but it definitely it sparked my interest in the whole topic and to try and learn as much about it as I possibly can. So I'll make sure I link your guys' sites and everything in the description below. And it's been a pleasure chatting, and thanks for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank podcast.